This is RiverTalks with Jonathan Brush, President and CEO of Unbound.
How you see a thing completely controls what you can do with it. That's a quote from Rory Miller, who wrote a book called Conflict Communication. We use that book in our tactical communications class for Unbound. It's one of my favorite books ever. A lot of people haven't heard about it, so definitely go look it up. You can find it on Amazon, and it's an excellent book about communication, and it has models and information in that I use literally every day to make sense of the kinds of communication situations that I'm in. But that statement, how you see a problem, completely determines what you can do with it. Miller goes on to say that it's not just that, but being able to see a problem and how you see a problem controls the options you have for that problem. I think that that's a really important insight and something that's worth pausing and thinking about a little bit. You can't solve a problem if you don't see it. That sounds fairly obvious, but how you see it controls the options that you have. Let me tell you about a somewhat unusual example. I have a passenger van, a 12-person passenger van that I use for family use, and we use a lot for work in Unbound. We use it to pull trailers to events and haul people and things like that. It's now an older vehicle. We bought it with relatively low miles. We put a lot of miles on it over the years. And recently it got broadsided by a kamikaze suicide deer. And that impact had me put it in the shop to do some body work to it and to get that side painted. Now, I wasn't happy about the deer, but I was glad to finally have access to a shop because I had, for a long time, wanted to get the van painted. The right side had some peeling paint. I think probably it had some work done before, and they didn't do a fantastic job on fixing that side. And so it had some paint that was needed to be fixed on the other side. And I wanted to do it, but around where I live, and maybe where you live too, body shops do so much insurance work that they just don't do any private stuff like that. And so nobody's really interested in looking at it. So I had it in the shop and I said, hey, do you want to paint this other side too? And the guy said, well, it's going to be kind of expensive. And it was relatively expensive overall. And he said, I'm not sure it makes sense to paint this van. It's got a lot of miles on it. Now, that's true. That's a problem. And he was seeing a problem, and I appreciated his honesty and I appreciated his observation. But how you see a problem controls the options that you have. So for him, he saw it and said, hey, this is an old mileage vehicle and you're basically just painting it, which is kind of an aesthetic thing. And is that really necessary? But I'm looking at that problem a little bit differently. First of all, for whatever reason, vans like that have gone up substantially in price, and even being adjusted for inflation, it would cost me almost 6 times what it cost me to buy that vehicle if I was to replace it now. And so that's a substantial cost. And then there's something else that's interesting. That cost is so high that if I was to replace both the engine and the transmission in that vehicle, it would cost me 1/6 of what it would cost to replace it. So, it's high mileage, but man, I could almost get a completely new vehicle from the inside out for far less than it would cost me to get a new vehicle. Now, if that's the case, and I'm going to keep that vehicle that long and do that kind of work on it, there's something else that goes on here. And that is that the way a vehicle looks will often determine how well you take care of it. If it looks like it's rusted out and it's ugly and you're embarrassed to be seen about it while you're driving around town and it's just ugly, pretty soon you'll let other things go. And those things will become little things, will become big things, and then you will be replacing a transmission. Or even if you replace the transmission, nobody wants to ride in it. And for me, I'm looking at this problem that this is something I use professionally. I use it to move students around and to move staff around and to show up at events. And everybody's a little demoralized if the side of the van has paint missing. It just makes everything feel kind of cheap and like it's falling apart. And so what looked like to my technician to be sort of a silly economic situation here, it's going to cost a lot of money to paint the side of the van on a high mileage vehicle. I had a whole separate set of options with the problems that I was facing. I not only want to keep this vehicle longer than you might expect because of replacement costs, but it's necessary that the vehicle looks good and doesn't demoralize the people that ride in it. You may have the same kind of situation in your life. You've got a problem, and how you see that problem will determine the options that you have. And so then you can infer from that if you don't like the options that you have with the problem that you're facing, you might need to change your perspective so you can see it differently and see if that adjusts your options.